Indiana Jones, one of the most loved movie series ever made. Everyone likes or at least appreciates these movies. Even the weaker entries still have something enjoyable about them. To date, the films have collectively grossed over $1.9 billion worldwide, and still have an active fan base, which, of course, would lead to a lot of cash-ins. Merchandise, TV shows, books, comics, and inevitably, theme parks. Ever since the late 80s, Indy has had a steady presence at Disney theme parks all over the world, in ways you wouldn't really expect or know about. So how did this all come to be? And what even are all the places you can find references to the franchise? Well, strap in as we venture into the dark and moldy depths of Disney history to find that out together. As we've discussed in previous videos, the 1980s were a time of great upheaval for the Disney parks. A lot of it can be traced back to the mid-70s with the opening of a major attraction, Space Mountain. Before that ride opened, Disney strayed away from doing straight-up thrill rides. Walt didn't want any kind of roller coasters in his park, thinking that it was too much of a liability. It took a lot of convincing for a ride as tame as the Matterhorn to open at Disneyland. When Space Mountain finally opened, it also opened the floodgates for other thrilling attractions to come to the parks. They cost less to make than the big dark rides and brought in a lot of new guests. It was a win-win. And yeah, other parks were doing more intense rides. You weren't going to be seeing crazy inversions or corkscrews. But for Disney, it was a huge deal. In addition to thrill rides, Disney was beginning to partner with other companies to bring popular non-Disney IPs to the parks. IP tie-ins have been in the parks since day one. The whole point of Disneyland was to promote Disney's film and television projects. But this was the first time we're seeing IPs brought from outside of the Disney realm. One can pin down two reasons. One, because it brought hipper and younger crowds to the park, including IPs that they enjoyed. And two, because the studio hadn't made a popular movie in years, so they had nothing to work with in their own library. Plus, there was another theme park being built right down the road that was going to have a lot of popular movies in it. Yeah, Disney wanted a piece of that pie for themselves. Star Tours would be the first ride to come out of this new age of collaboration. The ride partnered Disney Imagineering with Lucasfilms. But it wasn't just Star Wars. Other attractions like Captain EO and Alien Encounter would come out of this partnership. And of course, there was Lucasfilms' other big cash cow franchise, Indiana Jones. It seemed like a perfect fit. The aesthetics of the film aren't too far-fetched for the parks. Just look at Adventureland. And it would bring yet another popular film to the parks for people to experience and be immersed in. The first Indiana Jones attraction to open would be the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Show Spectacular, which opened with the rest of Disney's MGM Studios in 1989. Located in the Echo Lake section of the park, right next door to Star Tours, this was a stage show that recreated various scenes and stunts from Raiders of the Lost Ark, while explaining how they're done in the movies. This was back when Hollywood Studios was more centered on how movies were made, and when it was an actual working movie studio. So it fit with the theming. And it is one of the few opening day attractions at Hollywood Studios that's still in operation. As of recording, it's closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but is set to return at the end of 2021. So hopefully, the show will be back to wowing crowds very soon. And yes, Indy was in the Great Movie Ride, but the franchise wasn't central to it, so it doesn't count. The next Indy attraction opened in Disneyland Paris in 1993. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril is a roller coaster located in Adventureland. The ride is the simplest of all the Indiana Jones attractions, being just a steel roller coaster. Guests board mine cars and ride around a series of ruins. It was one of the first Disney coasters to feature an inversion, which shows how much thrills had grown at the Disney parks in only a couple of decades. And it did have some ties into the greater Adventureland story. It shared references with the old Explorers Club restaurant, crates for the club could be found near the queue, and Indy was seen in the background of one of the portraits. But overall, it isn't seen as one of Disney's best. Luckily for fans, the big flagship Indy attraction was yet to come. When people think of Disney, they think of big immersive dark rides. It would take a few more years for that to come to fruition, but finally, in 1995, the Indiana Jones Adventure, Temple of the Forbidden Eye, opened in Disneyland. Located in Adventureland, This was a journey through an excavation site in the Lost River Delta, trying to find treasure in the Temple of Mara. To help fund the excavation, they began offering tours of the temple to the public. After some tourists went missing, Indy ventured into the temple to go look for them, only to go missing himself. So now, Indy's friend Sala is sending us into the temple to go look for him. Temple of the Forbidden Eye would also be the first time we'd see the franchise incorporated into a greater narrative at the Disney parks. Original plans for the attraction intended on merging it with the Jungle Cruise. The cruise would have been rerouted into the ride, so you could see the inside of the temple from the boats. In 1994, a handbook was given to Jungle Cruise cast members, detailing a greater backstory for them to play off on. One half of it was the Jungle Journal, where a skipper for the Jungle Navigation Company documented their day-to-day life. And one day, Indy showed up to the JNC to look for the Temple of Mara, using Jungle Cruise boats to do so. He found it near the ancient Cambodian shrine, the one with the tiger. The merging was nixed due to cost, and nothing in either attraction hinted at what was going on in the handbooks, but it shows that Temple of the Forbidden Eye and the Jungle Cruise have always been intertwined. Even today, skippers will point out the temple when they pass by it, during their voyages. Jungle Cruise would be the linchpin that would connect Indy with the greater Disney Parks narrative, but we'll talk more about that later, so put a pin in it. It would be another 6 years before another Indiana Jones attraction opened. Indiana Jones Temple of the Crystal Skull opened with the rest of Tokyo Disney Sea in 2001. The ride is almost an exact replica of Forbidden Eye, with the biggest differences being its setting. Temple of the Crystal Skull is located in the Lost River Delta section of the park, set in South America. The temple is a Mesoamerican pyramid, and the designs of the attraction resemble ones found in Aztec and Incan cultures. Yes, I know those two civilizations are very different and aren't even on the same continent, but that didn't stop Disney from homogenizing them. And Sala is replaced by a new character, Paco, who's just supposed to be Indy's assistant. But aside from that, it's a lot of the same stuff that was at Forbidden Eye. And no, it has nothing to do with the Crystal Skull movie. That was still years away. The most recent Indiana Jones thing is a bit of an outlier. It isn't a ride or a show, it's a restaurant. In 2013, Jock Lindsay's Hangar Bar opened at Disney Springs in Walt Disney World. Jock is one of Indy's friends and associates. He was the guy who rode the plane in the opening scene of Raiders. According to the backstory, he and Indy were traveling around Florida looking for the Fountain of Youth when Jock came across the springs. He decided to settle down in the area and start a restaurant so he and his explorer friends could just relax for a little while in between expeditions. The highly themed restaurant contains a lot of references to the franchise, and you could just make an entire video pointing out all of them. Maybe we should. And with this, things start getting crazy. Just gonna warn you now, it's a lot to keep up with. Because as it turns out, Jock is a member of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. Half of you have been waiting for me to mention them, the other half are scratching their heads, wondering what the hell I'm talking about. The Society of Explorers and Adventurers is a big storyline in the Disney parks, centered on a collective of, well, explorers and adventurers. It started off as a small part of the backstory in Tokyo Disney Sea, but has grown into a huge expanded universe, encompassing every Disney theme park around the world. So, Jock is a member of it. Plus, he's buddies with the Adventurers Club, an old restaurant that used to be at Downtown Disney. But the connections don't stop there. Remember those Jungle Cruise ties I mentioned earlier? Well, Indy is referenced in other Jungle Cruise establishments. At Skipper's Canteen in the Magic Kingdom, there is a bookshelf located just outside of a sea meeting room, with dozens of titles by some of the Society's associates. One of them is The Eye of Mara by, you guessed it, Henry Jones Jr., further connecting Temple of the Forbidden Eye with the Jungle Cruise. Oh, and remember Paco from Temple of the Crystal Skull? He's got a book there too. But Skipper Canteen isn't the only restaurant with ties to the JNC, because the head salesman of the jungle, Trader Sam, owns the Trader Sam's bars at the Disneyland Hotel and the Polynesian Resort. And as it turns out, Indy is a good friend of his. He gifted one of his old whips and hats to him telling him that if he needed any help, then he should ask Marion. Sala gave him a map of the Temple of Mara. Marcus Brody asked him if he had seen Indy recently, since he disappeared. And Short Round was asked by Indy to give him an artifact so he could destroy it. So clearly, Sam is a guy that Indy trusts a lot. And if you thought that it ended there, think again. Because Indy would be an integral part of the backstory for Jungle River Cruise Curse of the Emerald Trinity, a Halloween overlay of the Jungle Cruise at Hong Kong Disneyland. Professor Garrett Reed, a disgraced member of the society, is one of Indy's biggest rivals, and Indy knew that he was after the Emerald Trinity. Reed also went after the idol in Peru, but luckily Indy got to it before he could. Anyways, he was the one who warned everybody what Reed was up to. Granted, there are some continuity errors. The article said that the idol was in an antiquities collection in California, even though Indy was forced to turn it over to Belloc so he could escape. Plus, the dates don't add up. Raiders takes place in 1936, Emerald Trinity takes place in 1932. This isn't even obscure lore, all it takes to know this is watching the movie. Also, the paper said that Lord Henry Mystic had gotten involved, which... how fucking old would he be by that point? Mystic Manor took place in the early 1900s. I'm gonna stop myself there before I turn into CinemaSins. Oh, and did you know that there's a Jungle Cruise board game? Well, there are little tokens that have passengers on them. And if you look at all of them, yep, there he is. I think I made my point. Jungle Cruise is a big linchpin that connects Indiana Jones to the Sea universe. There's also another adventurers group that exists alongside Sea. Kind of. The League of Adventurers is the backstory surrounding the Adventurers Isle storyline at Shanghai Disneyland. Nothing in it is definitively connected with Sea, but a lot of fans have taken it to be a part of the same universe because... why the hell not? Anyways, the League of Adventurers helped Indy discover the Temple of the Crystal Skull. Indy has never been identified as a Sea member, so having him work with multiple adventurer groups makes sense. That's also more in line with his character, just freewheeling and not swearing loyalty to one group or another. And given some of the shady figures in the Sea lineup, it makes sense that he'd try to keep his distance. There's probably more connections out there that haven't been discovered. Keep in mind, most of them are just Easter eggs hidden in set decorations. Which is why you always need to keep your eyes open in a Disney theme park. You never know what you might find. As I hope you've been able to see, Indiana Jones is more integral to the Disney parks than you might expect. The pairing might not make sense at first, but think about it. The stories that inspired the Imagineers behind rides like the Jungle Cruise or Big Thunder Mountain Railroad aren't too dissimilar to the stories that inspired George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. All of them took inspiration from history, from popular genre fiction, and whatever else their imaginations could come up with. Is it that far-fetched for a movie series that features death cults and holy grails to be featured alongside rides about pirates and talking birds? Not really. With the Sea universe ever expanding, and especially with Indiana Jones 5 on the horizon, who knows what might be in store for our favorite adventurer next? It could be more references and up-and-coming experiences, further developing the expanded universe. It could be entirely new indie attractions, giving us new ways to experience the greater world. Whatever the case, I'll be right by his side, eagerly awaiting what comes next. Because as the series has proven to us time and time again, there's always a new adventure around every corner. And that concludes the video. Now I'll pass the question on to you. What do you think of all this? Do you want to see more Indiana Jones in the park? Where do you want to see the story go next? Whatever you're thinking, let me know down in the comments. If you'd like to support the show, please consider hitting up my Patreon or Ko-fi page. If not, then be sure to like and subscribe to see more of my stuff. But that's all the time I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.